Welcome to Winterviews, Series 2, Episode 10. I am your host, Catherine Silva, Cat for short, and today we have the lovely Antonia Rachel Ward discussing Gothic horror. How are you doing today, Antonia?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. Would you mind just sort of giving a brief introduction about you and about your work for the people in the chat?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Antonia. I write horror and gothic and speculative fiction generally. I have written two novellas. I've got a novel that I'm working on and various other things. And I also run Ghost Orchid Press, where we publish horror, gothic anthologies and novels as well. So
Yeah, lots of awesome books coming out of Ghost Orchid Press, including an anthology that is currently in the works, in pre-order, right?
yeah, I have it here actually.
Ooh,
No
all
Petting
right.
Lot, which is erotic horror fairy tales. Loads of great authors in that, and that's going to be out in June. So
Awesome.
yeah, I'm looking
Come,
forward to that.
coming up really soon. So today we're going to talk about Gothic horror, my first question is going to be, what is it about Gothic horror that really fascinates you and excites you?
So I got into reading Gothic horror back when I was at university. Really, I was doing English literature, and I ended up reading, the really old classic Gothic novels going back to like the 18th century. People like Anne Radcliffe, and that sort of thing. And I got really interested in that because it's very much, it started out really very much women writing for women, which was unusual for the time.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, novels themselves were pretty new at that time, and women just loved the gothic romance and that sort of thing, and they absolutely devoured it. And I thought that was it was just so interesting because it was like women having a chance to express themselves, express their fears and feelings in a way that they hadn't really had a chance to, they hadn't had the forum to do that
Mm-hmm.
very much. Um, so I think that's initially what attracted me to the genre.
Okay. And in terms of the genre, um, Gothic horror is largely about setting, um, creating ominous atmosphere for your protagonist to encounter and have to navigate. How do you go about creating your settings when you're writing Gothic horror?
Settings are so important to me. To be honest, I often have a setting in my mind before I have anything else in a story.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I love sort of lavish description and really um, building that setting up. So yeah, I often tend to start with that sort of initial image, like I want to set something in a castle on Hadrian's Wall or something like that. That's one of the stories I'm working on is set up there, and that is where I begin to build my stories out of. Um, and I think in terms of Gothic, there's something really particularly interesting about setting in the Gothic, because a lot of the time it's about a house or a castle, a sort
Mm-hmm.
of a building in which you live, and it's turning that sort of home setting that's supposed to be safe into something that's much more threatening and dangerous. And I find that a really interesting concept to explore. Really turning the safety of home on its head.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll often involve, you know, a house with many rooms or something like that,
Yeah.
full of mysteries.
Yeah. There's definitely something to be said about like most gothic books or films or TV have like castles. I feel like are kind of like the main setting. Um, but it's really interesting whenever somebody does decide to try and do something that's like not the norm for a gothic setting. Um, and I kind of do wonder, this ties into another question that actually you had proposed, which is, you know, trying to keep horror relevant in the modern setting in places where we don't have lots of castles or you know, frightening houses. um, Trying to do something a little more like maybe a gothic horror in like your favorite coffee shop, or like or even like subway station or something like that. Um, but sort of on that same scale, how do you think that gothic horror uh, needs to sort of stay relevant in the modern age, when they are often set back in time?
Yeah, I love the sort of historical Gothic stories as much as anybody. You know, I like to read new ones by new writers that are set in the past. But I think that um, something that I want to look out for more, which I'm sure is out there and I haven't found it yet, is you know, Gothic set, like you say, in more modern settings, like urban settings, or even, you know, futuristic science fictiony settings. I'm sure these books exist. I just need to go digging around for them a bit more. Um, but in terms of like futuristic setting, as you were talking just now, it occurred to me that something like Suburbia, something like Don't Worry, Darling, for example, the
Mm-hmm.
movie has a, although it's not obviously gothic on the surface, it has that sort of gothic tone to it, in the sense that it is home and safety and it's turned sinister. So I think that's a great example of the sort of original sort of gothic sensibility turned modern. You know, it doesn't have to be the castles and vampires and stuff.
Yeah.
It's that sense of home.
Yeah. And it's
And threatening.
tricky. Sorry, I cut you off.
That's right. I was done.
Um, yeah, it's tricky because like with a film like Don't Worry, Darling, it's very like plastered in sunlight, and it is kind of this like Stepford Wives esque feeling, um, but it's definitely got the gothic roots in it. So that is an interesting point, and I hadn't even thought about thinking about that film as a gothic horror film, but I really
I
like
hadn't
that.
either until just then.
um, so another, I guess this will kind of segue into this, because another very prominent theme in gothic horror is actually doom and gloom, and that sort of ominous oppressive darkness, that you think of with a lot of classic gothic novels. And so when it comes to writing the doom and gloom, how do you put yourself in the right place to do that? Does it come easily, or is it more of just like you have to sort of like put yourself in the right mood to write that?
I remember one instance last year in the middle of the summer when it was roasting hot outside, and I was trying to write some kind of dark, gloomy, stormy kind of scene. I remember thinking this is really weird. But in truth, I don't think I have any trouble getting into whatever it is that I'm writing. I think once you get in the zone, I find that like mood or whatever doesn't really affect me. It's or what's around me. I just tend to focus on what I'm working on. But I do find sometimes that I surprise myself when I read something back and I'm like, God, this is really dark. Where did this come from? You know?
In the zone. You go into the zone.
Yeah.
Do you ever put on music or sound effects or anything to try and like well, it sounds like you're able to really like hone in and get right into the story, but do you ever have any instances where you've found that it's easier to sort of like help create a mood by listening to music or sound effects?
I listen to music all the time when I'm writing, but although I do have playlists for my stories, I don't think it really affects what I'm writing. I have it on and then I tune it out, so I don't really choose specific music to help me write particular scenes or anything like that. I can have on something that is completely the different tone than what I'm writing, and it doesn't really affect me, I think.
Nice.
I think when I'm focused, I'm just focused in it.
That's awesome, though. Like, I think that's one of my problems is I have trouble focusing. So I really like I'm I think that's so cool that you can just kind of like go in and it doesn't really matter what bright, sunny, particularly crazy hot day it is that you can just sort of like be in your Gothic setting doing your thing. I admire that a lot.
I mean, it doesn't always work. Half the time I'm looking at Twitter or something, but
Well, yes, social
write
media
a line,
is
look at Twitter, write another line.
social media is really really difficult. Twitter is definitely difficult to get away from at times. Um, there's an idea. Somebody should write a Twitter Gothic piece.
That
Social
would be
media
really
Gothic.
interesting.
So on to another point, which is that Gothic horror is traditionally features women in distress, and it's women who sort of go to a place that they're not familiar with and find themselves in danger. How do you write women in distress while also making sure to keep them, you know, strong and capable as the heroines of the book too?
I don't really feel like I think about it in terms of having strong, capable heroines. I tend to I try to think of my characters as just as people, and you know they have strengths and weaknesses like anybody else, and as long as they have something to overcome, then yeah, I think don't I don't sort of approach the character in that way of saying like she needs to be a strong hero or something. She's just a person dropped into this situation. she might react one way or another. Um, but I'm working on one of the novels I'm working on at the moment is a vampire. It's a Gothic novel, and my main character in that, she's pretty much an anti-hero. She's a bit of villain, really.
Awesome.
And so I suppose she's pretty strong and capable. She's definitely directing the story, but she's a lot of fun to write. But I think in that instance, the one that is in distress is less so. She's a weaker character.
Gotcha.
But it's sort of guiding them through this weakness to a point where they can overcome that I find to be interesting. So.
Well, that's awesome too, because I think it does kind of become part of a trope in Gothic horror for people to have to want to write a their female character as being like sort of able to get out of whatever situation they might be in with very like wily luck, and that's not always the case. People are people. There's only so much they can do. It's so much more interesting to just see how people are going to adapt to the situation, like you or I, if we were stuck in that situation. So that's like, I appreciate that too. I'm also very intrigued by the idea of having the villain as a woman in your book. That sounds very cool. And I mean, that does happen in Gothic fiction, but it's
she's so much fun to write.
Yeah. That's awesome. And of course vampires are awesome too. So can't wait for that. Was that the only Gothic thing that you were writing, or was there another thing? I thought maybe there was another thing, but maybe I was wrong.
I'm working on something else which is more like survival horror, dark fantasy
That's
kind
right.
of thing.
Okay.
It's not exactly Gothic, but
No. Okay. But very exciting indeed. And let's see here. What else do we have? Ah, yes. Supernatural elements are typically a part of Gothic horror. But are they absolutely necessary is the question. Can you write a Gothic horror novel that is more grounded in reality without the supernatural elements?
I was thinking about this because I just read two Gothic books in a row which had supernatural forces in them. One of them was the Hacienda, which is, haunted house kind of a novel. And I thought, actually, I feel like we tend to think these days that to be Gothic it has to have ghosts or vampires or something. But if you think about books like Rebecca or Wuthering Heights, there isn't actually any supernatural goings on. And a lot of the earlier Gothic novels, although the characters think there's something supernatural going on, it usually turns out to have a very mundane cause. And it's more the question of, is this real, or is the character imagining something? Are they losing their minds? That sort of psychological question of, and I feel like in a lot of more recent stuff, it does turn out to be that there is actually something supernatural happening. Whereas I think in the older Gothic novels, nearly always just explained away
Mm-hmm.
by the end. In Mysteries of Udolpho, there is nothing. It's all more or less in their head. The threat is
Mm-hmm.
tends to be the father figure or the husband or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's I was trying to think of any gothic horror that did not have supernatural elements, and I honestly couldn't think of anything. Like all the ones that come to mind have either ghosts or some other kind of creepy thing that's not based in reality going on. So I guess that means that I just need to widen my gothic horror to include more.
It's hard to think of recent ones for sure that don't actually have any ghosts or anything in them. I've heard people describe the last house on Needless Street as
Ooh.
gothic, um, which is interesting to me. Like I didn't really, I felt it was more of a thriller, but I can kind of see where they're coming from, maybe, because it is
Yeah.
psychological and it takes mostly place in a house and
Yeah. Well, there's definitely a trapped element in that book. Like you feel like all of those characters are kind of trapped in their own way. And it is like this house has kind of gotten this status of just, this guy that lives there that um, you know, doesn't go out very often and yeah, I that is interesting. And I loved that book. So now I'm like, yeah, I have to go back and like look at that again and see how that measures up.
yeah. I was surprised. I'd heard it just gothic before I read it, so then I read it. I was like, yeah, where are they coming from with that? But yeah, I guess I was expecting something a bit different from it because of that.
Yeah. Hmm. Okay. Um what are some of your favorite gothic movies or books or TV shows? Anything that you kind of love or would like to.
So my favorite book, my all-time favorite book is Wuthering Heights. I just think that's such a unique book. There's just nothing else like it. I've read it so many times. And there you go. That's a goth one that has absolutely no supernatural happenings in it. Um, and Jane Eyre as well.
Mm-hmm. That's one of my favorites.
No actual ghosts.
Yeah.
I love Rebecca as well. Um, and The Haunting of Hill House, of course.
Yeah.
I love the show. I mean, the book's great too, but I really love that show because it was just so intricate.
Yeah.
The way it was put together, I couldn't. When you get to the end, you're like, how did they do that?
Yeah.
How did they manage to keep it all figured out and make it all slot together the way it did? So clever. Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, I agree. That was really good. I've watched that one a couple of times now.
Yeah.
um, did you read Mexican Gothic?
Yeah, I really enjoyed that one.
Yeah. That was one that I read during the pandemic. I think that was actually my first book. I hadn't read gosh, I hadn't read in a long time, like just for fun for myself, and I read that during the pandemic, and it was like a light bulb turned on, and I was so excited and thrilled, and like it was just like, yes, this is what we need more of. I want more of this. It was a great, great book.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, Sylvia Moreno Garcia's other novel, Certain Dark Things. Have you read that one?
I haven't read it, but I have it
That's
on
a
my
vampire
shelf.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah, you should definitely read that. And that's a good example of what I was talking about earlier about sort of urban gothic or even sort of slightly futuristic. I really like that about it. I think she calls it like neon gothic or something like that.
Okay.
It's just having that sort of different vibe to it was really cool.
Nice.
Sort of more modern setting and really interesting characters as well. It has this sort of street rat character whose job is to pick up trash, and I love things with working class characters, characters that are not sort of privileged. You know, I just really enjoy when they're not all lords and ladies, and
Yeah.
you know, coming from a different sort of background.
Yeah. That's awesome. I'll have to move that up my TBR, which is under siege right now. Um, and then in terms of writing gothic horror, is it your do you prefer to write gothic horror over other kinds of horror, or um, like is it your favorite thing to write, or
I like to write quite a mixture of stuff, to be honest. I've written I've written gothic, I've written sci-fi, cyberpunk, like the survival horror one I was mentioning before. I've written the sort of 1950s B movie style novella, which is coming out quite soon. But I think that a lot of what I write ends up with that kind of gothic vibe creeping in, whether I intended to or not, because I just feel like that the dark stuff comes naturally.
mm-hmm.
It's just what I've read a lot of. I suppose you imbibe it, and
Yep.
so even if I'm writing sci-fi or something, you tend to have, you know, I'll end up with a big old house and
Nice.
creepy rooms and things, even if I didn't intend it.
That's awesome, though. It's like it just kind of speaks to what you love, and it just sort of seeps in here and there. I like that.
Yeah.
In terms of what you have going on currently, would you like to tell people in the chat what books you have coming out soon, or any projects that you would like people to be aware of?
Yeah. Well, I'll mention my gothic novella first because that is relevant. That's Marionette. That's set in 19th century Paris. It's a kind of gothic possession story, kind of erotic horror, and that's available now. So if that's what you're into, and I've also got this one coming out, which is decidedly not gothic, which is my 50s B movie, Attack of the Killer Tumbleweeds. It's completely different. I do like to mix it up a bit.
So fun.
That's coming out in May, so that's available to pre-order now. It was so much fun to write. It's all, you know, Hollywood stars and dancing girls, and just absolutely so much fun. I
Awesome.
really enjoyed writing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what I've got coming up.
Sweet. Awesome. So, Everybody needs to get on getting those two books. And I want to thank you for joining me today. Um, and I'm so glad that we could make this work with the time difference. Uh, it's the first time that we've been able to do something like that, so that makes me happy that in the future we should be able to maybe do more of these. Um, but thank you for talking Gothic today.
Yeah, thank you for fitting me in and shuffling your times around. Yeah, it was really nice to speak to you.
Yeah. Um, so coming next week, we're gonna have the last Winterviews episode of the season, which is with Stephanie Parent, and we're gonna be talking about sex and horror. Um, so we'll probably bring up Marionette uh, for the erotic horror novel. Um, but that will be a lot of fun. So
Can I just say I've read Stephanie's novel, Stephanie's forthcoming novel, and it's so good. I highly recommend it. It's absolutely excellent.
it's called The Briars, right?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. It does look really awesome. And I was really excited that she was available to chat. Uh, so should be exciting. Um, Thank you everybody today for coming and being being in the chat, and we will see you next week.